Hey guys, it's Timothy here. We're looking at more Aether Revolt. I appreciate everybody who left a comment or just viewed my review of the draft series that I did. I had a lot of fun making that. I have a lot of fun just making these videos in general. And if they're of any use for you, then that's why I'm doing them, right? They have helped me out a lot. They've made me better at my initial games and everything. So if I can translate that to other people being rewarded for watching these videos, then that's really all I need from it. But here we're looking at the best of the best. I like to do this with each set, or at least I've done it with the last couple of sets, and I like to look at the best commons and uncommons from each color. Now, a lot of times if you watch these type of videos from other people and then you watch mine, you'll see a lot of overlap, but I do agree and disagree with a fair amount. And this is strictly my opinion that I'm putting forth here. So these are the cards that I consider the best from Aether Revolt when it comes to each individual color. And of course, we'll be looking at artifacts as well. Now, a couple things to mention besides this just being my opinion is that I've done a total of 5 drafts of this set in addition to the 5 pre-releases I did. I went 2-2 in one of them, and I've been undefeated in the other 4. So I feel like I'm getting off to a very good start, and I would like to share that information, hopefully make you better at this format if you're not off to a rockin' start. The 2-2 was blue-black, and I felt like the color combination in general was very weak, whereas any of the green or red-based decks that I've been playing have been doing exceptionally well. So keep that in mind. I am going to go out, and since we're starting with the color, I will say that I think green is, once again, same with Kaladesh, just the hands-down best color in the set when it comes to the non-rares. I don't really figure rares and mythics into what I consider the best color to be, because most of your decks are made up of the commons and uncommons, but as you'll see, green just has very solid cards all the way around. So let's get kicking off here. The way I like to do this is the 2 cards that I think would take the first and second spot, and then a couple of honorable mentions. You can consider those third and fourth, but they're sometimes interchangeable and sometimes just cards that I wanted to make the list for one reason or another. So, starting off with green, what do I consider the best green common? It might be Lifecraft Cavalry, but I think it's actually a pretty big tie between these 2 cards here. Now, Lifecraft Cavalry is just a big beater, and it's very, very similar to Riparian Tiger. In my opinion, it's better than Riparian Tiger, and from what I've drafted so far, it's not that hard to turn on Revolt by turn 5. If you have anything like Unbridled Growth or Renegade Map in your deck, there's no real need to crack those right away if you know you have a card like this coming. So you can let them sit on the battlefield and then use them to trigger Revolt here without paying a lot of extra mana to do so. And the payoff is huge. A 6/6 Trampler is a very good card for 5 mana, and I found that this is just a really, really big body, a really big beater, and it's exactly what green needs in the common spot to push it really far ahead in some games. I would even draft multiples of these. Like I said, I do think Riparian Tiger is a little bit worse than this guy, and Riparian Tiger is already a very solid beater on its own. So I think this guy deserves his mention in the top. I would say that it's very close between the Cavalry and the Druid, though. The Druid is like a tried and true type of card. We see this in a lot of formats. A 2-mana Mana Dork in green in particular. It's usually either colorless or green, and it just does exactly what you want it to do. This one's even better than a lot of the other iterations because it does block very well. As a 1/3, it blocks all the 2/1s and 2/2s that are in this format, and avoids a lot of the 1 toughness ping and effects that also exist in this format, while also letting you just get your 4-mana cards out on turn 3 or your 5-mana cards out on turn 4. So ramp is always nice in limited when you're not paying a premium for it, and you're really not here. You're paying for a decent body and a ramp effect, and I love this card. I do take it as a sign that green is open if I see either of these cards coming to me. The problem is I don't know if people are valuing Druid of the Cow as highly because I've seen him coming really late, but green's not really open. So I don't know if it's that people just don't respect the power of Druid of the Cow, but I do think it is one of the best 2 commons in this set. If I had to pick, I would say Druid of the Cow is the best green common, but not by that much. I think Lifecraft Cavalry is just a huge beating. Now, mentioning what I said, the honorable mention, Scrounge and Banbar could be very close to one of the top commons. In fact, if it was going to nudge something out, it might nudge out Lifecraft Cavalry, because I think Scrounge and Banbar just sets up some really insane turns. What it does very, very well is works with Revolt cards, since it can move all of its own counters and kill itself at the beginning of the turn and make one of your other creatures really big and also enable Revolt in the same turn without having to spend mana for it. That's huge. Not to mention just green and green-black in particular have a really big +1/+1 counter theme going for them, and Band Bar enables all those strategies. It's also really, really sick with Wind and Constrictor, so keep that in mind. When I'm looking at 2-drops, this is probably the pinnacle of 2-drops in the common slot. This card is just insane for a 2-drop and sets up some really aggressive draws. The other card I wanted to mention here, which always pops up in these type of videos, is Prey Upon. Prey Upon may not be at its best in certain formats, and I certainly don't think it's premium removal here, but it is a good sign that green is open, and it's also green's pretty much only pretty much the only way green has to deal with other creatures, unless you're playing like green-red and you have red removal spells. So if you're looking specifically to be heavy green and you need removal, Prey Upon is the card you're looking for in the common slot, even though there are better options. But I do like Prey Upon. I will play a good number of them, and when it comes to high toughness creatures, Prey Upon is at its best here, and there are a lot of low toughness creatures in this set too that die to it, so it shouldn't be too hard to pick off something pretty easily with it. Moving into the uncommons, I have no doubt in my mind that everybody who has seen this card would agree that Ridgescale Tusker is the best green uncommon, and honestly, if I were to look back at the entire set, this may just be the best uncommon in the entire set. This card is absolutely insane. Obviously, everybody's compared it to Verdur's Gearhulk, and the fact that you're comparing your uncommon to a mythic Game Buster is pretty incredible. So this does everything that I said about +1/+1 counters, but it also just wins you the game. It's huge on its own. A 5/5 for 5 is just a solid card as it is. It's in green, which means that your cards like Druid of the Cow are not only going to benefit from this, but they're also going to help you ramp it out quicker, which is pretty insane when you start thinking about it. And it just makes your board really, really insane and hard to deal with. So if you're able to curve into this, maybe even you just get started on turn 3 and you go 3-drop, 4-drop this guy, you should be in a pretty demanding position. And if you have any sort of regrowth effects or effects that get this back from the graveyard or Blanket, you should have no trouble winning the game with Ridgescale Tusker in your deck. I would play any number of these, and this is the be-all, end-all for green signals. You see this guy come 3rd, 4th pick, nobody to your left is green, nobody to your right is green. Whoever's passing it to you, just take the card. The other one is Maulfist Revolutionary. I've not actually played with this card. I have played against it, and it plays out just as strong as it looks. It's a very powerful card. 3 mana, 3/3. With Trample is already decent. That you're not paying anything extra for the Trample there. You're just getting a very solid beater. Obviously, double green is a little bit of a consideration there, but by turn 3, that shouldn't be too much of a problem most of the time. And then you get the nice little proliferate effect when it enters the battlefield and when it leaves the battlefield. So if you can curve pretty much anything into this that deals with +1/+1 counters, it's a really nice effect. Even if you just play an energy card and then get an extra energy out of this, you got a little bit of a bonus, and then you get to set up the extra bonus when it leaves. This is the type of card that I can see trading with often, but it's a miserable card to trade with. Same as Treasure Keeper. It's not the type of card you really want to kill in combat because your opponent's going to get some sort of benefit out of it, but if not, you're just going to be taking 3 to the face. So overall, this is a very powerful card, and I have no doubt that these are the 2 best uncommons. But we will mention Monstrous Onslaught here, which is a very powerful card. The reason this doesn't take one of the top spots is because there is a fail scenario in which you don't have very strong creatures, or you just have no board presence at all and your Onslaught doesn't do anything. It's the same kind of thing that keeps Prey Upon from being a top green common. If you don't have the board to back it up, it's just not going to do what you want it to. But with that being said, the ceiling is very, very high. So high that the Hydra has completely destroyed it, and this card can just be absolutely absurd. If you have, a 3-power creature on board, you get to split up 3 damage. Of course, it's at sorcery speed, and that's just with a 3-power creature. There are tons of big creatures in green, so if you have a 6/6 trample or something like that, you get to split up 6 damage. And the thing I like about Monstrous Onslaught is you can't really get blown out by it the same way you can with something like Prey Upon, because it checks the power or checks the amount that X will be when you cast it, not when it resolves. So you can't really get blown out by having your biggest creature removed. It doesn't work the way that Prey Upon or Rishkar's Expertise would. So I think this is a very powerful card. It may not always make the cut. It may not always push you into green, but it is a good sign that green is open. however you feel about the card. And then the last one I'll mention is Narnum Renegade. There were a good number of other green uncommons that could have fit in this spot, but I like the efficiency of Narnum Renegade. It's the type of card that holds off other green decks in a mirror match, or just holds off big creatures in general. And the Revolt is a nice little bonus. A lot of times I'll just play this out on turn 1 and it'll be a solid guy. And if you can ever Revolt it somehow, maybe you play like a turn 1 Renegade map or something along those lines, or a turn 1 Unbridled Growth, and then you get to sack it and play this guy as a 2/3, then you also just got a good deal as a 2-mana 2/3 with the extra little Death Touch bonus. It's just a solid card all the way around. Alright, now green is super powerful, meaning that red and the rest of the cards here are going to have a lot of work to do. I will say that I don't think any of the colors comes anywhere near the sheer power of green, but of course that's green's thing, right? So let's look at red. For commons, I believe the strongest common here is Aether Chaser. And it's a little bit of a toss-up here between Aether Chaser and Chandra's Revolution. Obviously, they go in the same kinds of decks. Aether Chaser is just very, very good. The thing that really pushes over the top is First Strike on a 2-power creature, meaning that just like the Death Touch one in black, or Aether Swooper in blue, it's going to be very likely that it gets in, makes a servo, and also survives its first attack. If you're trying to be very aggressive, this is the exact kind of creature you're looking for in the early games, even though it does drop off a good bit in the late games, or if your opponent plays one of the many 2/3s, it can get brick-walled pretty easily, but on the play, it's the type of aggressive creature you want to see. Chandra's Revolution is just very good removal. It kills nearly everything. It won't kill, there's a good like 20% of the creatures in this set that Chandra's Revolution is not going to get the job done against, but Chandra's Revolution is so powerful on the play when you get to just smash your opponent with an aggressive red deck and then also lock down their lands or punish them for being mana screwed. It's just very good removal, and the land thing is normally just an added bonus that doesn't really affect the game that much, but sometimes it does, and it's the type of thing that you may not really see. You may not tangibly see how effective the land tapping is because your opponent's not playing something, but it's the potential. There's the potential there that your opponent just couldn't play something because you tapped their land. So I like these as the best 2 red commons. If I had to pick a follow-up, I would probably pick Sweatworks Brawler. I feel like this card has just played out very well as a 3/3 menace, usually for about 3 mana, and if I have to play it on 4 mana, it's still not the worst thing in the world. The Improvise is really nice. It's not that hard if you're playing red to get an artifact out before turn 3, and then have it to feel your Improvise on turn 3, and just have this come down as a 3 mana 3/3 menace rather than a 4 mana 3/3 menace. But even if you have to just curve into this on turn 4, it's still a pretty good beater. And I like the card. I like how miserable it makes blocking for your opponent if it comes down early enough in the game. And then there's Shock, and Shock is just Shock, right? There are enough creatures in this format that die to it, and it's really nice in tangent with the First Strike creatures, allowing you to take down 4 and 3 toughness creatures off of your First Strikes. Or off of your first striker creatures if you time the Shock correctly. So I really do like Shock. I think it is a middle-in pick. I don't think it's a particularly high pick, nor do I take it as a sign that red is open. But keep in mind, some people value Shock a lot higher than others. I think it's solid, but I don't think it's premium removal again. So take it if you want it. Take it if you're in red. Otherwise, leave it alone. Moving into uncommons, red has Scrapper Champion, which I've already heard a good number of stories about. Scrapper Champion is the type of card that starts off very, very weak, but has the ability to spiral out of control if it's not answered right away. Now, obviously, it can be answered pretty easily. Prey Upon and Shock deal with it with almost no trouble at all, and it only leaves behind 2 energy. But if this thing gets to attack even once and gets a clear attack in, it's very likely that you are on track to be winning the game, at least as far as board presence goes. This attacks as a 3/3 double striker the turn after you play it, and then potentially 4/4 double striker, and so on and so forth. It's not as good as something like Solemn Recruit, the white double striker, but it is such a good threat that your opponent has to deal with it pretty much right away, or be prepared to deal with the double strike on it. It's very, very powerful. It's good with combat tricks, which there are a good number of in this set. And by that, I mean specifically pump effects, for instance, the Invigorated Rampage. But the thing that might knock this down a notch is that it is easy to deal with if you deal with it right away. It's also punished by bounce effects, but it's still a sizable enough threat that I think red decks will almost always want it. Moving on, we have Hungry Flames. Hungry Flames is just a good card. I lost one of the only pre-release matches I lost was to a top deck Hungry Flames for exactly lethal. It was pretty ridiculous. But all stories aside, Hungry Flames is just efficient removal. 3 mana instant speed for 3 damage is already good enough to be one of Red's best cards. That sort of effect always takes one of the top spots, but adding the 2 damage on is really nice too. And it always feels bad to be on the receiving end of a Hungry Flames, because you already know you're losing your creature, but you also get shocked on top of it, and it just doesn't feel good. Hungry Flames is a sign that red is open. The honorable mentions here, Reckless Racer has been very impressive for me. The rummage ability is very, very relevant for an aggressive deck if that's what you're doing with Reckless Racer. And it's not that hard to get this thing tapped because it can attack pretty easily with First Strike and 3 toughness. That makes it hard to deal with in combat. And also it can crew vehicles to get that ability going. And I think I've won a good number of games just by being able to loot away a good number of lands. It is discard first, then draw, but it's also a May ability, so if your hand's already good, you don't need to really worry about the Racer's effect. And if your hand needs a little bit of improvement, it's the type of card that you can pretty easily get a swing in with it or get it tapped. It's also very nice against abilities that tap it. For instance, the Take into Custody card that people feel like is playable. It's not. By the way, it's not. If they target something like this with tap effect, you get to draw off of it because it triggers anytime it becomes tapped. It doesn't matter how it got tapped. But I like the card. It's very, very solid. And the other one I'll mention here is Enraged Giant. I don't think this card is super impressive. I do think it is good, though. And if you are dedicated to improvise, if you have plenty of ways to get this down for 5, potentially even 4 mana, it should be pretty great. I don't think there's a way to get it down before turn 3, but it seems plausible that you could get this down on turn 3 and just put your opponent under so much pressure. This is not as good as the blue flying improvised creature at Uncommon, but I do think it is still a good enough beater. If you have the artifacts to support it. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but I wouldn't play a 6-mana Hasty Trampler for a 4/4, but I would play a 5-mana Hasty Trampler, and if I'm paying a 4 mana for it, I'm actually actively excited about it. So I think Enraged Giant has enough upside if it comes out early enough that I believe it deserves to be one of the top red uncommons here. That sends us into black here. Now, black's a little bit of a disappointment because it has really strong upper-end cards, but a lot of weak lower-end cards here. Looking at the commons, I think nobody's surprised to see that the highest up commons here, or the highest valued commons, are essentially removal spells or things that function as removal spells. Dare and Demolition is your catch-all. I don't think... maybe it's just me, but I actually don't think Dare and Demolition is so ridiculous in this format that it needs to be a first pick. I think it's super clunky. I think there are better removal spells that deal with almost everything that Demolition deals with, but it is unconditional removal, and even at sorcery speed, 4 mana for that sort of effect is still really good. So it does still deserve to be one of Black's best commons, but I think people are misevaluating just how powerful it is, and they're taking too many copies of it. It's the type of card I'd probably play about 2 copies and then start cutting things because it gets super clunky in the 4-drop slot. And there are already so many better things you could be playing at 4 mana, or at least good creatures you could be playing at 4 mana. So Dare and Demolition has the thumbs up for me for best black common, but I do think it's dangerous to go all in on them and take too many copies. And then there's Aether Poisoner, and this isn't an insane card by any means, but it's very similar to the red, what is it, the red Aether creature, I guess you'll call him. Being a 1/1 Death Touch means that your opponents are a lot of times reluctant to trade for this. A very smart opponent will just kind of bite the bullet and block this because they know it's going to trade eventually for a Death Touch creature anyway. But a lot of times people are just scared of trading their creatures for Death Touch creatures, so they'll let this swing in and you'll get a free servo off of it. And if you get any extra energy, you can start making additional servos. And then this card is also just very good on defense and blocks particularly well, just like the Narnum Renegade creature. fact that black has this kind of dirtily death touch creature at common and at a very low cost is pretty nice. It means you can set up some late game shenanigans by threatening to trade with some of your opponent's bigger creatures, and that a lot of times is enough to stop your opponent's big green decks from attacking into you for a while. The honorable mentions here, Cruel Finality is just a good card. There's nothing wrong with it. I would play multiple copies in my deck, but again, it gets kind of clunky for this sort of effect if you're running 3 or 4 copies. The Scry is a very nice bonus on top of the effect you're getting, and the -2/-2 is enough to either kill most creatures that you want to cast this on by turn 3, or at least weaken a creature in combat enough to the point where you should win that combat. If you're using it as a combat trick, I think the Kaladesh Black instants are a little bit better, Subtle Strike and Rush of Vitality, but if you're using this as a removal spell and you don't have better removal in your deck, I think the card is just a good card to put in your deck. So Cruel Finality, again, not the type of card I look at and say, well, black is definitely open, but the type of card that once I know I'm playing black, I'm happy to take a couple copies. The other card here, and this is what I'm talking about, I don't even think Fenhauler is that good of a card, but I had trouble coming up with another honorable mention here. If you look at the list of black commons, they are very unimpressive. We'll see in a second, black has some pretty premium uncommons, but as for the common slot, it pretty much stops at Cruel Finality, and then the rest just feels like filler. They're very synergistic cards. There are a lot of artifact-based effects and a lot of sacrifice outlets, but there's not a lot of really inherently powerful cards. Fenhauler, same as I said with the Giant for the red uncommons, it has the potential to come down early enough and just be a huge beater, but that's all it does. It's just a big vanilla beater, and I think you can do better. If you need a finisher in your black deck and you just didn't open a huge bomb rare or anything, I think Fenhauler will get the job done. Uncommons. Now, the 2 top uncommons should be pretty obvious here. Maybe not. I think a lot of people would expect one of my honorable mentions to be here, but I think Gifted Aetherborn and Vengeful Rebel are the 2 best uncommons. It's very, very close with the first honorable mention. These cards are just super, super efficient and super powerful for their mana cost, that I would be happy to first pick either of these and start running them in my deck. I think Vengeful Rebel is probably the better card, but you do have to do a little bit of work to make Revolt happen. Like I said, though, black has a lot of sacrifice outlets, so it's not too hard for black decks to get Revolt going. And I think Vengeful Rebel's -3/-3 ability is a huge payoff for putting a little bit of extra work into the Revolt trigger. Gifted Aetherborn is just super efficient. It's going to get in a lot of damage. It can swing a race in your favor, having a 4-point life swing. It's pretty much everything that... well, not quite. It's close to the Dwarf Aerial Responder, but not quite. It is, however, another Death Touch creature to watch out for, and the combination of Death Touch and Lifelink is really, really nasty, meaning that your opponent doesn't want to trade for it very often, doesn't want to block it very often, so you can get some pretty free attacks in there and then gain some life back. And Gifted Aetherborn works very nicely with the indestructible instant speed effects that black has coming from this block. Alright, Fatal Push, obviously, if I didn't have that in one of the top 2, it was bound to be an honorable mention. I think this card is good. It's definitely one of black's best uncommons, but I don't think it's insane. I really don't. The fact that a lot of the sacrifice outlets in black are also sorcery speed means that Revolt at instant speed is a little bit harder to pull off than I initially thought it would be. I do think Fatal Push has a high payoff, being able to kill 4 mana cost creatures, but playing it in multiple drafts, I found that there were times I was not able to kill the creature I wanted to. Either its mana cost was too high, or I couldn't get Revolt going at the right time in order to kill a 4 mana cost creature or something along those lines. The failsafe is that you have the first option here, so it is just a 1 mana removal spell for really early game creatures, and to that degree it works a lot like Deadweight, being able to tick off very early game creatures, like I said. But I think the card, despite its flexibility, despite its power level and its mana cost, is not better than either of the 2 uncommons I have above it. And then Perilous Predicament, they were kind of in the same spot as the commons. I don't think Perilous Predicament is an insane card by any means. I think there are matchups where it will be very good and matchups where it will be very poor. It's definitely nowhere near on power level with the other 3 uncommons here, but I did want to mention it. I did want to say that I think if you're scrounging for a 4th best black uncommon in this set, that Perilous Predicament will take the spot over most of the other cards that are there. Black does have a lot of build around uncommons as well, which is worth mentioning here. All right, moving into blue, and then we'll wrap it up with white and the artifacts. Blue, again, widely considered the weakest color in Kaladesh. I don't know if that's true or not. I think overall that's true, even though I think it was also close with red. But I would agree that blue was the weakest color in Kaladesh as far as commons and uncommons go. Now, we'll see if that's true for Aether Revolt. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the first or the only draft that I haven't gone undefeated in was a draft in which I played blue-black, and I found that blue just had almost no way of closing the game out, so I was relying on my other color to do all the work, and I guess I just didn't draft enough big creatures. So looking at the commons, I think Bastion Inventor and Hinterland Drake are the best commons here. We should already put a stop here and a red flag. If Hinterland Drake is one of the best commons, then that's not saying a lot for blue here. Hinterland Drake is an okay card. It's perfectly serviceable flyer, but it's not like the type of card you're wowed by, and it's not really like a sign either. I don't think the card's amazing. I do think it is good, but it's just like a common blue filler card in my opinion, and the fact that I had to say this was one of the best commons already doesn't bode well for the common slot here. And Bastion Inventor is definitely no Gear Seeker Serpent. If I'm picking between one or the other, I will play Gear Seeker Serpent every single time, but it seems like it'd be really good in green blue where you can put counters on it or put equipment on it and just be able to bash with it. It's the type of card that you play as a finisher, but you replace it if you have a better finisher. So I don't think Bastion Inventor is very good, but I do think it's a pretty solid card. The honorable mentions here, Aether Swooper I think is nice. The 1 power on it really irritates me because it can't really close out a game in the air. It's not that far off from just a 1/1 flyer, as opposed to a 1/2 flyer for an additional mana. The servo thing is nice though because A, blue generates a lot of energy, and B, it's an invasive ability to put this on an early game flyer and have it attack. The 2 toughness means it won't trade for other 1 power flyers like Thopters, and you're very likely going to get your servo off of this, which justifies the card, but I don't think this is a very powerful card by any stretch. The other blue common, we're really pushing it here. Ice Over is not premium removal. I keep saying that, but it is solid removal. It'll do what you want it to about 50% of the time, and then your opponent will find a way around it. Either they blink the creature that Ice Over is on, or they just never attacked with the creature, so putting Ice Over on it in the first place isn't very good. Or they have an untap effect or something along those lines. So Ice Over is a little bit obnoxious, same as any blue aura-based removal or white aura-based removal. It's easy to get around it, especially in this set where there are so many blink effects or sacrifice effects. But blue sometimes needs to scrounge for a cheap removal spell, and if that's what you need, you'll play Ice Over. So it deserves a spot on this list, but I'm not excited by a lot of these cards. Let's see if the uncommons can make up for it. I think Widkin Raiders is the definite best blue uncommon. This card's very strong. Again, at 6 mana, it's a little bit unexciting, but if you can get it down for 5 or less, it's really strong. And just like the Giant, it is possible to get this down on turn 3. I won a game by doing that. It was very, very nice, and it just continues to bash in. 3 toughness is pretty dangerous since a lot of removal spells in Kaladesh especially pick off 3 toughness creatures and really prey on them. But I think the card's payoff here is enough, and blue definitely wants to be playing a good number of artifacts in most of its decks, that this is a pretty strong uncommon, and the type of card that says to me, you know what, blue might be open this draft. The other card I wanted to mention in the uncommon spot is a card I haven't actually played with yet, but I'm pretty sure deserves its spot here. Skyship Plunderer is just a 2-mana 2/1 flyer with upside. A 2-power flyer is that much better than a 1-power flyer, because if your opponent can't answer a flyer right away, it gets in a ton of damage over the course of a game. Fear the Vaporkin, Feel the Welkin Turn. These type of cards are very aggressive, and while blue's not the most aggressive card, or most aggressive color in the deck, blue does a good job of mucking up the ground enough to the point where you can get in a lot of damage in the air. And this also has the nice little proliferate ability attached to it. So like I mentioned already in this video, blue makes a lot of energy, And if you pair this in something like blue-green and you're able to make +1/+1 counters, Skyship Plunderer is the card that you're actively looking to get on the battlefield and get some early swings in with. Honorable mention here goes to Shielded Aether Thief, a card that I think has played out very well. I'm sorry, it's getting cut off at the bottom there. It is a 0/4 if you're not aware. You may flash it in, you can block with it all day long, and you usually get one nice little block out of this, even though it's starting to become very obvious when people have Shielded Aether Thief. But you can also pay 3 energy to draw a card, and that's where the real power of the card is here. If this was just a flash 0/4 blocker, I wouldn't care about it. If it was a flash 0/4 blocker that gave an energy when it blocked, I wouldn't care about it. But the nice combination of flash, the block ability, and the card draw ability is pretty sweet. This lets you convert cards like Aether, the Scientist, I don't know, Scry Guy, whatever his name is. It lets you convert the energy from that into a straight draw instead of a scry, which I like quite a bit. And this guy is exactly what you're looking for in blue if you're trying to win in the air with cards like, Windkin Raiders and Skyship Plunderer. It mucks up the ground early enough and often enough that your opponent's aggressive decks are going to either need to waste a removal spell on your 2-drop or just deal with the fact that you can block and draw cards off this. The other uncommon I'll mention here is Trophy Mage. I gave this a pretty low rating. Again, it's a 2/2 if you can't see it. Trophy Mage, I gave a very low rating in my review, and that was under the assumption that if you don't have 3-mana artifacts in your deck, the card is not worth playing. I have noticed, though, that blue has the majority of common and uncommon artifacts, and they are the type of effects that you'll play in blue. For instance, the blue Automaton is 3 mana, and the blue Implement is 3 mana, and those are decent cards to play, especially if you're trying to improvise or revolt things. So Trophy Mage with at least 2 targets becomes a very, very good card in your deck. With 1 target or less, I'm less excited about the card. Alright, White. White was very strong in Kaladesh. Not quite as strong as Green, but if you ask me, I would say White is the second best color when it came to Kaladesh and led to some of the most unique decks like the Blink decks and the Go Wide token decks. Here, I think the best commons in White are going to be Dawn Feather Eagle and Caught in the Brights. Dawn Feather Eagle is an uncommon that they forgot to make an uncommon, or at least that's the way I'm seeing it, because the card just works, does pretty insane stuff, and even if you don't have a board, it's a 5-mana 3/3 flyer, which is okay. The Vigilance tacked on to the +1/+1 is also very nice, and it's a bad beat when your opponent plays this because you know you're not going to be able to swing back, and you're also going to have to block a different way than maybe you intended. So this is a very good card, probably White's best common. I do think Caught in the Brights is a little bit worse than Dawn Feather Eagle, so I'd be happy to take Dawn Feather Eagle in my aggressive White decks. Caught in the Brights is a good card. It has a little bit of a pitfall in that your opponent can still use their activated abilities and their static abilities, and they can still crew vehicles. So a question I've encountered a lot is this card better or worse than Revoke Privileges? And I do think it's a fair bit worse than Revoke Privileges, but it is still a 3-mana pacifism, and those tend to be pretty good, and I see no reason why it shouldn't be good here, if not completely great. The vehicle text is not irrelevant, but I do consider it mostly flavored text. I don't even play a lot of these common vehicles in the decks in Kaladesh, but I think Caught in the Brights does its job well enough that you'll play at least 1 or 2 copy 100% of the time if you get it, and I don't think you need to go much higher than that. Honorable mentions for commons go to Girapur Osprey. I mentioned this in the review. I don't know why I like this card. It is an aggressive little flyer. There's nothing special about it. But it does its job. White wants to be attacking, and White wants to make sure it's constantly getting damage in. Girapur Osprey lets you do that pretty easily, and there aren't a lot of things that spar with it if your opponent doesn't have a flyer of their own on their side of the board. The other card is Countless Gears Renegade. This is something I'm not very excited about. I also think it has the worst name in the set, for what that's worth, since it makes only 1 servo instead of countless servos. But a 2-mana 2/2 is always a playable card, at least in aggressive decks, and the fact that you have the potential upside of an additional servo token tacked onto this makes it a pretty good playable. I don't think it's something that I would be actively looking for in most decks, and certainly not a sign that White is open rather than just being a White filler card, but I think it does its job well. White uncommons. White has some pretty strong uncommons here. The strongest being Thopter Arrest, no doubt in my mind. This is White's strongest uncommon. Is essentially just Oblivion Ring, which is a good card if you're not aware. Exile on any artifact or creature until the opponents can deal with Thopter Arrest. And being an enchantment, it's pretty hard to deal with this. Cards like Fragmentize and Appetite for the Unnatural do still deal with it, but there's only one pack of Kaladesh floating around, and there aren't a lot of ways to deal with enchantments in Aether Revolt. So this is pretty high removal. There are times your opponent will deal with it, and then it's almost like your card didn't exist, but then it's just 1 for 1, and I think the card is still quite strong even in those situations. The other one here is Airdrop Arnauts. This is essentially Flying Arborback Stomper. The stats are different, but you get flying, so it's pretty good. I see a lot of people playing this out on turn 5, and that's fine, but I think the bonus is enough here that if you're not under a lot of pressure and you're able to chip in small amounts of damage, I would probably hold off and make sure I get the 5 life off of this. 5 life on top of an already good flyer is a pretty good deal, and I think the card beats in the air strong enough or hard enough that it's a very high pick. I have actually first picked this card out of a pack already. The honorable mentions go to Felidar Guardian. I'm so tired of talking about this card, but it's still cool, right? Felidar Guardian sets up some pretty nice stuff. It lets a card basically revolt itself by blinking itself out and then back in. It does some pretty crazy combo stuff with other cards. It can target any permanent you control, so even if you just play this and then blink a land, you have an extra mana available, and your Thopter Arrest can target a new creature. There are just countless things you can mention with Felidar Guardian, and even though the body is not the most impressive thing on a 4-drop, it has enough possibilities that I think I'd be happy playing any number of these in my white decks. And then finally, Deadeye Harpooner. This could be higher up on the list here if it weren't so hard to get this Revolt trigger to be relevant by the time you want to play Harpooner. Harpooner is a little deceptive. I don't think it's usually a 3-mana card. It seems more of like the type of card you play on turn 5 to kill a creature that attacked, when you're able to somehow trigger Revolt off of some effect or ability and then also play this in the same turn. The effect is very potent. It's a strong ability to just be able to play your uncommon creature and destroy a creature of your opponent's, but it does have to be tapped, meaning that it probably had to attack already, so it's not going to deal with big blockers. And you also have to have Revolt active for the turn. That being said, it's not impossible to make this happen. It just doesn't happen as frequently as I think you'd like to. It works very nicely with instant speed blink effects like Acrobatic Maneuvers, which is worth mentioning here. Finally, the colorless cards. In this case, all artifacts. So, as it is with most sets, there are a decent number of artifacts that are just bad, and they're made bad on purpose because they can fit in any deck, so they have to tone down the power level of the card, I guess, because of its flexibility and its ability to go in any deck and kind of manipulate like the color pie trends or whatever. I don't know, I'm rambling. Let's talk about artifact commons. Renegade Map, I love this card. I've kind of raved about the card. Yes, it is the prophetic prism of the set. No, I'm not exaggerating. Yes, I do believe that. Yes, I will take the card very highly. I love splashing cards, especially with how powerful the gold cards are in Kaladesh block. Kaladesh specifically, Aether Revolt as well to a lesser extent, but Renegade Map does everything you want to in this set. It fixes your mana, it taps for Improvise, it sacks to trigger Revolt for the turn. It just does everything I want to be able to do, and I will take a good number of these in draft. And I'm already starting to notice the trend that people are picking up on this card being quite good. The other common here I'll mention is Mobile Garrison. I don't think this card's impressive, but we're looking at artifact commons, right? A good number of the artifacts in this set are either geared towards certain colors, and I left them off this list. Like if they had a colored activated ability, I didn't mention them here because they are specific to those colors, and I don't think they beat any of the cards I already put on this list. And then the rest, there are tons of rare artifacts and uncommon artifacts. So when we're looking at the commons, we're looking at a very small subset of commons here. But Mobile Garrison is a serviceable attacker / blocker. Has a unique little effect which can be relevant if you have a lot of activated abilities in your deck that require tap-in, which there aren't too many of. But I think the card's perfectly playable. It's just the type of card that I'd end up cutting a good majority of the time. Universal Solvent is not an impressive card. It only goes in a certain number of decks. I think if you're an aggressive red-white deck, you don't want Universal Solvent, but if you are a mid-rangey kind of blue-red improvised deck, then Universal Solvent goes up in value. It's less of a revolt card than it is just a very good improvised card because it lets you do something, essentially puts a mana on the battlefield for your improvised cards while also turning into a removal spell later in the game. And I think that's a pretty strong effect for a common, while still not being a super busted common or anything along those lines. You don't want this in a good number of decks. Iron Tread Crusher, I was really scrapping the bottom of the barrel here for playable common artifacts, but there's nothing wrong with Crusher. It's like I mentioned in the review, or whenever I mentioned it, this is the vehicle you play when you just didn't get better vehicles. It is a pretty big body, which makes it a very good sideboard card against mid-rangey, like big green creature decks, since it blocks so well. But it's unimpressive, and a lot of times it's just like the Mobile Garrison, the type of card you'll cut if you need to start making cuts. And finally, we're going to move into the uncommons here. I will give you one guess as to what the best uncommon artifact is. Yeah, well, duh, it's Untethered Express. This card's absurd, and I hate it. I hate how efficient it is. It attacks as a 5/5 Trampler. It's very, very immune to sorcery speed removal outside of maybe one or two cards. It's Crew 1 for some reason. Like, I think they meant to accidentally, like, they put Crew 11 and then, like, they just accidentally typed 1 instead. Untethered Express is insane. It goes in every deck, which is weird because when you look at Renegade Freighter was the type of card that you don't necessarily want in like your blue-black or your blue control decks or something like that. But Untethered Express, you will just play this in any deck. You could be playing like blue-red control or something like that, and you'll still play it because you can crew it with anything on the battlefield, and it's just going to close out the game if it doesn't get answered right away. Not to mention, it puts 1/1 counters on itself, which is relevant for a number of other cards too. So Untethered Express, super strong card, definitely best uncommon in this set, followed up by Treasure Keeper, another card that I'd be very happy first picking if I didn't open a strong rare. Treasure Keeper makes for a very strong first pick because it is colorless and it doesn't tie you to any specific color. Not to mention it's just a good card. 4 mana 3/3 is respectable, nothing wrong with that, and the death trigger is pretty nice. It's the type of card I see my opponent play and I just kind of like roll my eyes a little bit because I know I'm going to have to kill it at some point, but I also know they're going to get value off of it when it dies, and it never feels good to have to kill your opponent's Treasure Keeper. Honorable mentions here for uncommons. I will mention Pacification Array. This is a type of card I think a lot of people shrugged off, but I think it plays very well in the majority of decks you can play here. Tappers are good in limited, especially cheap tappers. This one is not what I would consider cheap, but it is efficient enough. And tappers are also the type of cards that scale in power. When your opponent starts playing bigger creatures, you start tapping bigger creatures, meaning that your Pacification Array really got stronger as the game goes on. It can also tap your opponent's artifacts, which is really nice against vehicles because they no longer crew their vehicles since they know they're losing 2 creatures. If they go to crew the vehicle and you tap the vehicle down, they not only lost their vehicle for the turn, but they also lost the creature they crewed it with. So it's nice measure against vehicles. It's also nice that you can use this for improvise, and it's just an artifact that sits on the battlefield while never actually leaving the battlefield and gets a decent amount of value over the course of the game. I like it more in control and decks, but I could see a place for this in some aggro decks. Finally, last card I'll mention, Barricade Breaker. Not an insane card by any means. Again, it's cut off like a lot of the cards in this video. Sorry about that, but it is a 7/5 for 7 with Improvise. It must attack each turn if able, or at least each combat if able, if you're taking additional combats. Lightning Runner, I guess. But and the fact that you can improvise this out pretty early is nice. I've gotten this out as early as turn 4. Which feels very, very good. I got an auto scoop from my opponent that game. And it's a big beater. It's not impossible to deal with. We've already seen a good number of Death Touch creatures in the set at common and uncommon, so it's not impossible to deal with, but it is just a huge body, and it must be dealt with pretty quickly. I do think the card is strong. I think it fits into a good number of decks, and it's the type of card that if I were playing a blue controlling deck and I was looking for a way to close out the game, I might take the Barricade Breaker here as my game ender. But there we go. That's what I consider the best commons and uncommons in this set. I think this list has really helped me kind of evaluate cards even higher. I'm really holding these cards up as the best of their color, so whenever I'm evaluating a new card that I haven't played with yet, or I haven't played against it, I'm comparing it to these cards and seeing whether it lives up to how powerful some of these cards I mentioned are. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope it's been useful to you. I would love to hear what you guys think the best commons and uncommons are. I think maybe the most controversial one here will be Fatal Push, but I think I'm going to stand firm behind what I said on that card. So send me your list. Let me know what cards you think deserve to be the top commons and uncommons in Aether Revolt. Let me know your stories. Your success stories and your fail stories for the format, so we can kind of get used to it together. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching, so be on the lookout for more Aether Revolt content. My name is Timothy, and as always, I'll see y'all next time.